Ryan Earnhardt here from creativesoundlabtv. I'm hanging out at the Sonic Scoop channel today for MixCon 2021. And special thanks to Empirical Labs. I'm going to be doing a video today with the Big FrEQ and the Arousor plugins. If you happen to be watching this live at the premiere, stick around. After the video, we will have a live Q&A with Empirical Labs. These plugins are actually inspired by real pieces made by Empirical Labs, the Big FrEQ and the Distressor. And it's just a really cool take and evolution on the original idea expanded and now in plugin form. So today I have a test mix going of a song called Tonight by Tyler Powell. Let's check it out. So Empirical Labs has a system where they periodically make revisions to their plugins. In fact, the last revision of Big FrEQ actually enabled users to turn off the visual graph. And we also have seen updates for alternate ratios and other improvements. So it's really cool to see a company actually taking feedback from the users and then making revisions as they go along. Both plugins are available directly from Empirical Labs website, and they could be activated using the iLok Cloud and the iLok USB. So the philosophy of these plugins is really to bring the analog feel and put it into plugin form. So let's pick a few sources that really highlight the features of this plugin. First, we got to talk about the soft knee. When you increase the amount of compression on a source, it has actually a very wide range. It makes it feel like a sweet spot is very large. He's a very dynamic player, and I wanted to really use that soft knee to my advantage. So we can see here that even in the soft passages, we're getting 5, 6, 7 dB of gain reduction. And yet in the loud passages, we were getting maybe 7, 8, or 9 dB of gain reduction. Based on the style of compression, we can use that to our advantage on very dynamic sources like this. I use a second Arousor right after it, and I go for maybe a bit higher ratio. And what I'm trying to do is really shape the transients of that kick drum. Another really cool thing is the soft clipping. Without it, it just seems a little too plain and too vanilla. But with some soft clipping, all of a sudden we bring the rock and roll back into the picture. So the soft clipping almost is a form of compression, and you can really think of it like that. We can use this to further shape the transient and that attack. So this is a source that really needs to be listened in context. With the kick drum soloed, I mean, we can point things out, but you're really not going to hear what's happening unless you pretty much bury it and see how it works in the mix. Again, listen for the attack and listen for the fact that it's almost like turning down the kick in the mix. And perhaps it's a little bit too much at that point, so I'll dial it back.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know. While I'm eating crumbs you threw on the floor, I'm not the same fool you used to adore. You look nervous but baby I'm sure.
Move on to snare drum here, and some interesting things that I've kind of used with the EQ on snare drum that I want to show you. We can actually overdrive the snare drum a little bit. If we don't want to use a compressor, or we just want a kind of a grungy sound or kind of a trip hop kind of thing, we could put some drive in the snare and actually can sound really, really amazing. Another thing of note is, instead of doing a boost to the high end of the snare drum, and there's often hi-hat bleed and other things, I instead do a cut of the fundamental of the drum, and that's about 200 here, and this is ahead of an Arousor. I am, in effect, increasing the high end. Here it is with the high end boosted, and then a second pass will be with the low end reduced. And just notice how when it's before a compressor like this, it actually does shift the tone to make it sound like both of them are actually boosting the high end. On the snare bottom, there's actually kind of a cool tip is to do a boost of the fundamental in that mic instead of the top mic.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out, and baby, it shows.
So with these two tricks, reducing the fundamental in the snare top mic, we're able to add in high end in a very smooth and musical way. But then we can get back our fundamental by using the bottom mic. Because I have a little bit of a boost at 12K here, and this is just to basically use less of this mic. I'm boosting the parts that I like from this mic, and then I can reduce it overall in the mix. Basically just kind of take down some of that snare buzz a little bit.
But baby, I'm sure that this is true. I dreamt of you, I dreamt of you.
So this is a really great place to add saturation. I have it, way up at 2 o'clock for the floor tom here, and I have 3 different layers of saturation. So it's really surprising how much saturation is going on here, but again, I'm kind of splitting the difference of compression duties here. I'm partly using saturation as a compressor, but I'm also using it to add complexity to the low frequencies of this source. And then I'm using the Arousor to really shape and contour the sound of the drum, the attack and the sustain. Let's hear it in context.
That this is true. I dreamt of you, I dreamt of you.
So for overheads, I like to keep the attack, I want it to control the attack, but I also, I want to have some attack because I want it to add to a common goal of having the drums actually come through and project through the mix. Yeah, that's really interesting. The meat of that snare pokes through. I'm starting to notice a trend here because on kick we noticed that it added some low-end punch. And it wasn't just about the clarity of the attack, but starting about 8 here, we could notice the thickness of the kick, and now I can hear the thickness of the snare come up. Let's go on to the room mic. This makes use of our detector sidechain EQ. This is basically just making the compressor more sensitive to certain frequencies over others. A lot of times we might think of this as a de-esser, but in this case, we're going to make it more sensitive to the cymbals. What we're trying to do is to actually make the compressor turn down the cymbals for us in our room mics. This would be just be a dream, right? Because we love having the room mics in our toms, but as soon as the drummer hits the cymbals, it's way too much. For bass guitar, we have a bass amp recorded with RE20, and it sounds great on its own, but I just want to control it more and shape the sound of it. Specifically, I want to give it a little bit more dirt. So I'm taking a little bit of the honk, a little bit of the string noise, because the saturation is going to bring that up as well. Then I'm boosting it just a touch before it goes into the Arousor. Now this Arousor that's second in chain here, this is really focusing in on just that one note, and it's going to turn it down. So that's why I have a bit of aggressive ratio here of 10-1. So it's barely doing anything on that note there, so it's exactly what we want it to do. Of course, we're using a high ratio because we don't want to compress everything that it comes in contact with. We want it to be very specific. When it gets to a certain point, there we go. Now we're going to do our work. And we're going to adjust the sensitivity of what reaches that point, that threshold, by this detector sidechain EQ. So we can really get this to react in just the way that we want. So with this under control, now the second Arousor is getting a more even experience. All the notes are typically more the same, and if we want to slam this hard, it's pretty much getting equally slammed. Yeah, so much more even. And then now, the reason why this matters is because when you add something like saturation, I mean, you don't want certain notes getting absolutely obliterated and then other notes having barely anything on them at all. You want the texture to try to be somewhat consistent, especially with the bass. And I'm trying to kind of emulate the sound of a bass amp that'll help this bass cut through a mix better and also just extend upwards into the range of the guitars. Really works because we have multiple areas and multiple angles of attack. We can use compression, but we're also using saturation, which is not necessarily time-based. It's a little bit more frequency-based, and it's just kind of running out of headroom. So it's a really great way to get this bass under control. I think it works really well for this mix. So for the electric guitars, I really treated them as kind of a family of instruments. I was really happy with how they sounded, and I just wanted to kind of keep them under control a little bit. So I was kind of inspired by the idea of using an LA3A for guitars, and so I went for the opto setting, I went for the A, and I also went a little bit faster on the release. I think it works really well. But what's interesting about this guitar bus is the Q on the high pass. I want to clean up the low end, but I don't want to lose the meat or the thickness of the guitars. And so using the Q, I'm able to do two steps in one. I can take out the low end, take out the mud, and do a slight boost at a cornering frequency so that I can add in some meat and kind of blend those two worlds between the bass and the guitars. Yeah, so this is a great way to get that really tight, kind of Foo Fighters style guitar sound. It's just that very in-your-face. Yeah, it's a tight sound, but it's also very thick. Let's hear it in the context of the entire mix. So you can see how this is really effective, and this is actually after the compressor, but in my test mix I put it ahead. So imagine what the compressor will do when you're adding or removing low end. It actually becomes kind of a seesaw, more of a tilt. You add low end, you decrease the highs. You take out some, you increase the highs. So it's a really effective way to do huge shifts in your guitars.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows.
Yeah, this is just a great way to make the guitars louder in the mix. Anytime you have something that occupies more volume in the mix, it can be a little odd if it's only focused on just the mids. And usually something that's pretty loud in the mix, it has a little more lows, a little more highs. It's a little more full range. So if we want to turn up the guitars, it might be a little more suitable to add in just a touch of thickness. So let's move on to vocals, and this is really where a lot of the fun begins. Of course, I'm already thinking of the opto modes. I'm thinking of the finisher on the Big FrEQ, just ways to saturate the vocal on certain syllables, because I want the vocal to be fairly consistent, but I don't want it to sound stagnant. So I'm actually going to, very early in the chain, add in some saturation. You know, it may be that the vocals are very consistent because of compression, but there's still going to be tonality shifts because very first thing in the chain was saturation. And so it'll actually sound like the vocalist is getting louder based on the fact that it's a little bit more saturated. However, because we're using compression, it's staying right where we want to in our mix. So here I have the Big FrEQ pushed in about 4 dB of really 1K, and I'm doing a really wide push into the finisher here. You know, my inspiration for this sound was kind of like the vocals of the band Metric. There's a female vocalist that every single like vowel sound tends to kind of overdrive, and it's kind of a really cool, kind of a warm overdrive sound for vocal. And that was kind of my idea behind this. I have a little bit of a high pass, not much, just kind of for safety, and this whole thing is really all about that overdrive. Let's check this out.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know. While I'm eating crumbs you threw on the floor, I'm not the same fool you used to adore. You look nervous.
So I'm doing this here, and then I'm actually following it up by a reduction at the same frequency. So I'm trying to kind of balance it out, not change the tonality of the vocal. I'm just pushing the saturator in a different way. So after this very first Big FrEQ, then I go to the Arousor. And the Arousor is just all about just slamming this vocal. I'm not afraid to really let the compressor do its thing and really let it show its flavor and its color. That's really what it's all about, is getting the right color. So here I went for the opto, the B. It's slightly more aggressive sounding. And, you know, at first I thought maybe a layered approach would be better. However, later in the mix, I came back around and said, you know what, let's just slam one compressor and really be aggressive with this.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know. While I'm eating crumbs you threw on the floor, I'm not the same fool you used to adore. You look nervous, but baby, I'm sure that this is true. I dreamt of you, I dreamt of you.
Yeah, so, the default settings are putting me in pretty high saturation here, which is pretty cool. Let's see what the second harmonic does.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know. While I'm eating crumbs you threw on the floor, I'm not the same fool you used to adore. You look nervous, but baby, I'm sure that this is true. I dreamt of you, I dreamt of you.
Yeah, and vocals, I love a fast release just to keep it right up front in the mix. The opto makes it so easy for vocals. I mean, it just works. It's a little bit of a layering process. We have some saturation going on. We have some compression. We have a compensation for that boost at 1K here. We have a little bit of a boost, it kind of some strident frequencies just to kind of give it some edge and to kind of help it cut through. So 2.5K there. But then at the very end of the chain, kind of at the bus level, we have a little bit more compression. And I just want to make sure that things are staying under control.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know. While I'm eating crumbs you threw on the floor.
Yeah. So, just a high ratio just to catch the peaks, just to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere, okay? I'm using the opto for its flavor. I'm using this for control. So finally, I just wanted to see what the Arousor on more complicated tasks. I have the Arousor on the drum bus, and it's interesting. It's actually been off this entire time. So I have it at 1.5 to 1 ratio. Kind of a slower attack, fast release. I mean, these are kind of standard settings that just feel instinctive at this point. But I want to show you what this does on drum bus. I think it worked out well.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the
Yeah, it just adds that smack, that punch. It almost sounds like the drums are being stretched with like rubber bands and then it's being punched again. Yeah, it sounds good. And so with this, I'm going to do like a 50-50 mix. And then finally, a really critical stage is the Arousor. I know this sounds nuts, but I put it on stereo bus. And yep, it's been on this whole time. So not so much saturation, maybe a little bit, just in case a snare hit sneaks through. But, slow attack, fast release on opto. Because, I love the sound of this opto. It sounds just really good. I like it for its flavor. But what's cool about this is that we can use alternate ratios, 6.5, 7. But here we can use 1.5 in opto mode. You can't do that with a Distressor. So this is really cool to get the opto flavor, but in all the different ratios.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows.
So I'm really just using it 30-40% of the way in there. I don't want to completely cream the mix. I just want to add some strength to the mix.
You are a vision, baby, I am a ghost. You're living high, I'm living lower than most. I'm in the gutter and you're giving the toast. You got it figured out and baby it shows. But here's a secret that you'll never know.
There's a lot of color that you can get from both of these plugins. And I've tried to show you some highlights on what you can expect and how these sound. But of course, you don't have to take my word for it. Now, there's a 15-day free trial over at empiricallabs.com. And you can try these out for yourself and see how they work. I really enjoy the workflow. You certainly don't have to use all the features or get overwhelmed by the capabilities. I recommend just starting out with the opto settings, either A or B. Just shift-click, pull up the input until you start getting some compression happening, and you're good to go. And then with the Big FrEQ EQ, go ahead and try it with the visuals off. So turn off the graph and just use your ears. You'd be surprised at the kind of decisions that you'll start making when you're not looking at the adjustments. Now, if you happen to be watching during the live premiere of this video, we're actually going to be following up this video right now with a live Q&A with myself, Empirical Labs, and Sonic Scoop. All you have to do is follow the link in the description or follow the link in the upper right of the screen here, and you'll be taken right to the broadcast. I'll see you there.